I'm Carrie, and this is Student Loan Chit-Chat. Thanks for joining me. Today's article deals with a 2018 story about a young man who is suffering from anxiety, and the anxiety is his $100,000 or nearly $100,000 student loan debt. As you know, I will be doing stories quite frequently on this channel, and the goal of the stories is to help educate people about really I don't like to say tragedy, but the serious consequences of taking out student loan debt that young people and older people cannot afford to pay off. So, as you know, if you've been following this channel, that my $110,000 student loan was recently forgiven, just a couple days ago, in fact, where I received a letter saying I have a zero balance. But in all honesty, I would have kept the loan well into retirement, as I really had no financial way to pay it off. I sunk myself into a hole, and I, along with many other people, have learned lessons, and the goal of this channel is to teach those lessons. I do want to say, before I start this particular story, that I've read a lot of student loan stories over the years, and I've talked to actually a fair number of people that have student loans, especially since I started this channel. But there's something about this story that, really bothered me. And I think what bothers me the most is how this young person seemingly did everything right, and everything has come out so wrong, and the anxiety and the suffering this young person is going through. So as I read this story, again, it's never to judge, but there's just something that is inherently heartbreaking about this story that I've read a lot of stories, but this one really bothered me. So anyways, I will be making my commentary throughout this story, as this story is a bit longer. I don't know how long it'll take, but as you know, it takes as long as it takes. All right, here we go. This is an article by Vice, and Vice is basically it's a journalism news information channel. And the one thing I do like about Vice is they don't really sugarcoat things too much. For the most part, they call it pretty much what it is. All right, so here we go. It's by Vice. And this is titled, "The Crippling Anxiety of Living with $100,000 in Student Loans." The author of this, I'm afraid I'm not pronouncing it correctly, is Seamus Kirst. And this is from October 2018, but the story is more relevant than ever, even though we are now in September 2022. The crippling anxiety of living with $100,000 in student loans. My massive debt doesn't just make me anxious. It's changed the way I date and spend time with friends. Here we go. I cannot think of many things that I dread more than checking my student loan debt balance. I am 28 years old, and I grew up middle class in a city neighborhood in Syracuse, New York. I was the valedictorian of my large public high school, where the graduation rate hovered just above 50%, and I was the first person from my school to ever attend Brown University. I went on to earn my master's degree in journalism from Syracuse University. All right, so looking at this, he's 28 years old. He appears to have come from perhaps a struggling income bracket as far as his family. He says the graduation rate hovered just above 50%. So that tells me that he probably didn't have a lot of role models to help guide him into the world of college. He's the first person from his school to ever attend Brown University. So right off the bat, he's been told, I can pretty much guarantee you, go to college, it will better your future. And he did just that. And he did it in very good timing, with a master's degree included, by the age of 28. I now personally owe nearly $100,000 in student loan debt because of them. That's not including the additional loans my parents took out to help pay for Brown as well. All right, gonna pause. His parents probably took out loans, and I'm willing to bet his parents didn't have a lot of experience with it. Don't know for sure. He doesn't really discuss his parents, but my gut hunch is his parents took out loans, but they were unable to guide him because they probably didn't know much about student loans either. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm willing to bet. I know I'm not alone in having this financial burden. Student loan debt in the United States is staggering. Right now, 44 million people collectively owe more than 1.5 trillion, that's with a T, in student loans, with recent grads owing around $37,000 each on average. 4 out of 5 working professionals with student loan debt reported it as being a significant or very significant stressor, according to a 2017 survey. I am one of those people. When I start thinking about my own loans, it can send me into an anxiety spiral. There are so many stressful decisions to make that can have long-term financial consequences. Should I refinance my loans, or should I do a government loan forgiveness program? Should I do a graduated repayment plan where my payments start low and then grow each year based on the assumption my salary will grow as well? Or should I do an income-based repayment plan where my payments are based on my salary for a given year? Right, gonna pause here for a second. When he talks about should he refinance his loans, or should I do a government loan forgiveness program, I can tell you right now, I am absolutely against refinancing federal loans into private loans. You've heard me say this on a couple other videos I've done. I am absolutely against it. I don't care how bad the government loan system is. Almost anything is better than a private loan. You have more payment options, you have more opportunities for forgiveness. Private loans may be cheaper sometimes, okay? But it's really no different than taking a credit card. That's really all it is, and they can do with it really whatever they want, and your chances of getting any sort of loan forgiveness, slim to none. Private loans, I hate to say it, I always think of private loans as kind of like card sharking. That's just the connotation I get with it. But I don't like private loans, and I will say it 100 times. Do not, in my opinion, refinance a federal loan where you will have the best chance and the best perks of being able to potentially have it forgiven. Once you go into private loans, that's pretty much it. You don't really have forgiveness in private loans. Very, very rarely. A graduated repayment plan he talks about, I don't like those either, because again, you're assuming you're going to make more money. Think about the pandemic and all the people that were on graduated repayment loans. Well, they all lost their job terribly through no fault of their own because of the pandemic. I don't like to plan anything in the future on where I think I'm going to be financially. I don't know where I'm going to be financially until that future moment hits. I absolutely do not like graduated repayment plans. I don't like them. And of course, that's where the payments start low and then grow each year based on the assumption your salary will grow. You cannot assume your salary is going to grow. And even if your salary grows, you don't know what is going to happen to the salary of your partner or your spouse. You're just assuming that's your salary. But maybe my partner, my spouse, for whatever reason, is going to be out of a job. So there was no salary growth. I just don't like those type of plans. Or should I do an income-based repayment, he talks about. All right. That is actually my favorite if you are public service. An income-based repayment on public service employee loans or jobs, I think, are terrific, as long as you know you're going to be public service. But if you are going to not be in public service, you need to be careful. You've heard it here. Okay, you need to be careful, as I've said before in other videos. If you are not public service and you are paying on income-based, your loan is going up, most likely, every single month. And chances are, chances are you're not building enough payment to pay into the, you're not paying enough to pay into the actual principal. He says, I lose sleep worrying that I will never get out of debt. $100,000 is a load of money, and owing that much as a 28-year-old is daunting. Like many other young people with major debt, when I think about the cost of a wedding, buying a home, or having children, I cannot imagine doing any of those things anytime soon, if ever. $100,000, 28 years old. His parents also took out loans. This reminds me of the story I did a week or so ago, and it was a young gal in her 20s who also has, a huge student loan debt. What was it, a couple $100,000 she has? Who's guiding these young people? Nobody's guiding them. And that could be a whole video in itself as to who I think is at fault. So I'm not going to get into that in this video, because that literally is a video in itself. But here's the bottom line. If we as adults, myself included, aren't experienced at taking out student loans and figuring out how to pay it off, then how are we expecting the 20-year-olds to do it? Okay, I'm 55 and I didn't pay off my $110,000 student loan. I don't think I barely touched the interest. I think I probably paid around 35, maybe 40,000 of it, which was about the interest. I never touched the principal. And somebody may say, geez, how could I possibly give people advice? Well, I'm giving you advice based on everything I've learned, based on everything I've gone through and everything I've read. And I've been doing it for over a decade. But the bottom line is we are failing the 20 and 30-year-olds going into college. We are failing them. We're failing the 18 and 19-year-olds. And why are we failing them? Because we, as older people, haven't even figured out how to do it. Moving on. There have been countless times I've opted out of going out to dinner with friends because I was worried about affording it. There have been other times where I have eaten something cheaper beforehand and then just gone to the more expensive restaurant to sit while other people eat. It is crazy how much monthly student loan payments can bring down your salary. I've noticed how many people who don't have student loans do not seem to fully understand how much repaying impacts your quality of life. They might not understand that those with student loan debt are often paying hundreds of dollars per month for many years. All right, so there's something I can relate to. He talks about going out to dinner with friends, but you eat at home first before you go out. I've done that. Yep. Been to some fancy restaurants, and I've ordered a cup of soup, and that cup of soup was still really expensive, in my opinion, at $10 for, 4 ounces. But, I needed to, present myself and have something. People who do not have student loans probably now more than ever are, thanking the good Lord above for keeping them out of college. Here is the thing. The people without student loans, let's just say have never had student loans, he is right. They don't understand just how daunting student loans are. And that is the problem we're having. The people taking out the student loans don't understand it, and they're taking it out. And the people who don't have the student loans don't understand it. They lucked out and didn't take any out. Again, we're failing our young people. We're failing to show them. I was failed, in my opinion, in some ways. I mean, I was in my 30s, so I kind of blame myself more than anybody else. But if you're 18, 19 years old, I mean, really, we won't give them a business loan for 25, 30 grand, but we'll say, hey, you know what? Go ahead, take $100,000. It's all good. Why? Because it's guaranteed. But it does impact your life, and it will impact it for decades. But oddly enough, that's not explained on the college brochures now, is it? Another video in itself. A more guarded social life. Beyond that, my debt sometimes even discourages me from dating, which can easily become very expensive. In New York, dating often means going out to dinner or going to the movies. Sometimes the thought of making romantic gestures by buying someone a nice meal or even paying $50 or more for 2 movie tickets and 2 drinks can feel unrealistic when I remember that I have this debt that is not only waiting to be paid off, but also constantly accruing interest. Something that I might recommend for this young man, and he may not want to hear this. New York is really expensive. And if you have a lot of student loan debt and you're trying to get the best bang for your money, I'm not sure a city like New York is the best place to achieve it in, especially if you're trying to find some sort of life balance to go along with your student loan debt. He might, I hate to be a dream killer. I would probably look at leaving New York. If you are sitting on $100,000 and you're trying to find some sort of work-life balance, I would find a less expensive place to live. There have been several times where I've wanted to ask someone out, but then have thought about how much not only the first date would cost, but going on follow-up dates as well, and then decided against it. I've also realized that there are cheaper ways to go on dates. For instance, going to coffee is way more affordable than going out to dinner, whether you are splitting the bill or making a gesture by paying for just yourself. Yeah, you're in your 20s. And again, this is not discussed in the college brochures when they're trying to convince you to take out a student loan or attend that out-of-state school, private school, Ivy League school, whatever. That's the age you're supposed to be able to go out, date, have some fun, but that's never going to be discussed. It's not going to be found out until the student has taken out the loans and they have to start repaying it. Something to consider also, it's different going to school and working a part-time job and paying your, living, because there's a big reward at the end. You're getting that diploma. That's kind of I like to look at that's kind of like the carrot that they're kind of like dangling in front of you. Okay, you're gonna get this degree, this award. The problem is that same level of work effort changes once you've got your degree in your hand, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, there's nothing dangling in front of me anymore except this really big bill that I didn't realize how much it was. I never really had I was unable to conceptualize just how much it was. People wonder, well, how is it a student can go to school, full-time, work a part-time job, and that doesn't seem to be a problem with them working those same hours. Why can't they just, keep that same attitude up when they graduate? Well, it's hard to keep that attitude up when you graduate. There's nothing exciting anymore down the road. There are no graduation parties to look forward to. There's really, your social life can change dramatically with these loans as well. So there's nothing to look forward to. It's like the party is over. You've graduated from the school, you're done, you're entering the work world, the party's over. And something we don't let kids, we don't teach them is how much of your life do you want to sacrifice working to pay off the bill from when you went to school. And that type of work sacrifice is very different than when you're sacrificing and going to school and working. I hope that makes sense, but there's a certain reality that sets in after you've graduated that you realize, okay, now I get to work, 50, maybe even 60 hours a week because I'm having to hold down, say, a job and a half so that I can now pay this bill. And there's no exciting party at the end, especially when you're looking at, $100,000, $100,000, and you're 28 years old. I know that doing things like buying someone a drink or a meal can be implicit ways of expressing romantic interest in them, but I have just learned that when you are worried about debt, sometimes it is easier to just say you are interested in them than trying to convey that through spending money. That is true. It's not always about having to spend money. Fear of being honest. In the United States, we are taught that it's taboo to talk about money. From a young age, we're told that we shouldn't ask people how much money they make, and we definitely shouldn't ask people how much debt they have. Debt becomes our secret. I often write about my struggles with mental health, my experiences with addiction, and even my sexuality. And I cannot tell you how much scarier it feels to write this piece where I am being honest about how much debt I have. I can tell you that growing up, I really wasn't taught about debt. I was taught, how to balance your checkbook. I was taught how to make change, count money. But was I really, really taught about debt, the dangers of debt, how to stay out of debt, how to read credit cards? I wasn't taught any of that. I learned that through the school of hard knocks, really hard knocks. We don't talk about money. And that's probably one of the reasons we have student loans in the trillions. Nobody or very few people are actually directly taught money. And the more you struggle socioeconomically, the less you most likely talk about money. I've always said to myself, how come, really wealthy people, okay, talking about your 1%ers, the people are way up there. Part of the reason I believe they have generational wealth over and over again, it's because they're teaching each other how to keep the money in the family. Okay, the mom and dad are going to teach it to the next 2-3 generations as to how to keep it. Now, we could go into another whole story about, what sort of, scheming tax stuff they do to keep their money, but put that aside. Okay, generations of wealth and family stay, in my opinion, because they're actually teaching it to each other. The parents don't hesitate to teach it to the kids, but go down the socioeconomic line and go lower and lower and lower until you get to, just the average middle class. And then it's like, in my opinion, money becomes this huge secret. Like if you should find out just how much I make, or what my cost of living is, whatever. And because if we can't be honest with money ourselves, how can we ever translate that to a 28-year-old before he takes out $100,000 in debt? If we can't discuss it. So if parents aren't free to discuss money, and I'm not talking about how to balance your checkbook. I'm talking about, no, we need to talk about, rewards, consequences for spending so much money on student loans, buying cars, whatever. And we need to show we need to look at how much you actually make. We need to do a math breakdown of what you're actually going to spend, how many years it's going to take you to pay off, da-da-da. We don't talk about that. Money is very taboo in American society. I don't know about other societies, but in American society, it's definitely taboo, and we wonder why we have so much consumer debt. Immense student loan debt can feel like a moral failure rather than the product of being screwed by a system. As the cost of higher education has experienced extreme inflation over the last several decades, the borrowers who had less means to begin with are the ones who have to deal with the mess for years. Yep, immense student loan debt can feel like a moral failure, but I'm here to tell you it should not be. Companies go bankrupt all the time. And they reorganize, they refinance, maybe do whatever lobbying they need to do to get done whatever they need to get done. They're back on, but they're back up and running again. To me, it's not a moral failure, it's a naivety. It's naivety about how student loans work. Yes, my $110,000 student loan was forgiven. Does that make me a moral failure? No, not at all. Does it make me a failure in understanding just how student loans work? And should I have been a whole lot better prepared to really understand it? Absolutely. But financial failure, in my opinion, does not equate to moral failure. Otherwise, Dave Ramsey, talk show money guru, should never, ever have a talk show, right? But yet millions of people listen to him. But I don't see them touting that he's a moral failure. Banks that have failed, investment companies that have failed. Think of all the companies and even individuals that have failed and bounced back. Are they moral failures? Nah. So student loan, it's not a moral failure. It's just a failure to either gotten the right information and or done enough homework and really understanding it. And I know there are many borrowers out there who have it much harder than me. There are people whose parents were not able to take additional loans to help them, or borrowers who had already have their own children they need to provide for. People of color owe disproportionately more in student debt than their white peers. And studies have shown racial discrimination hiring is prevalent, making it harder for people of color to have access to jobs that will help them earn the money to repay their debt. That is another whole video in itself as well. It is true that people of color definitely, because of socioeconomic reasons, have a harder time paying off their loans. What I could have done differently. There are certainly different decisions that I could have made nearly a decade ago to have less student loans today. In hindsight, I now realize I could have gone to public universities, worked more jobs during school, and waited to get my master's degree until after I've paid off my undergraduate loans. But I would also argue that when you are 18 years old and have never taken out loans before, you are far from being an economic expert. We grow up essentially being told that the more educated we are and the higher ranked the universities we attend, the more access we'll have to better jobs and the more we'll be paid. When you are 18 and get into your dream school, or even when you are in your early 20s and get into a graduate program, it's easy to convince yourself that it's all a necessary investment. Yeah, he was 18 years old, and I guarantee you somebody from his high school and or the universities that he decided to apply at told him, well, you need to go to the best school possible, best school usually equating to being the most expensive you can afford. And really, in my opinion, it's not the most expensive you can afford. It's the most expensive that will let you take out the most amount of loans. Okay, that to me is what usually equates to. What we can afford is very different from what we can take out in loans. Well, maybe I could afford an in-state school if I spent 2 years out of community school. Oh, there goes the light. Maybe I can afford an in-state school if I spend 2 years at a community school, and then I go to a state college and work, a part-time job or as many hours as possible. That's what we can afford. But really, what the hidden language is well, it's however much you can get in student loans. And yeah, 18, 19, 20-year-old, you're living the dream, or at least the dream you've been told to live. So he's right. You're not thinking about the economics of the situation. You're thinking about, hey, you know what? This is my dream school. And in his case, the first in his school to attend Brown University at a school that hovers around a 50% graduation rate. And he's right. It's easy to convince yourself. It's all a necessary investment. But he didn't come to that conclusion on his own. Somebody fed him that conclusion over years and years. Okay? He was fed that information. He didn't wake up just knowing that. And this is where we are faulting young people. We're spending years convincing them this is the only way to get ahead. No, it's not. And there are different ways to do it and still get that college diploma. But it may be a very different path. We can't blame him for this. Hopefully that sentiment still proves itself to be true for other borrowers and for myself. Even if the current system could still use a major reform, people shouldn't have to spend years in financially induced emotional distress before they feel like their investment pays off. Yeah. Imagine if on a college brochure, or at least if not on the brochure, let's even leave the college out of it for a minute. Let's just do it on the student loan paperwork, because really it's about the money. On the student loan paperwork, you had to sign a line that said something like, if you take out this loan based on the field you are majoring in, photography, I don't know, whatever, okay, I'm not slamming photographers here, okay, but, we're talking fields that don't necessarily make a lot of money, and some fields that are more of a hobby than they are an actual degree-earning field. But if we really think about that, if you had to sign some sort of acknowledgement that said, I'm aware that if I take out this $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 loan, that I may have sleepless nights for the next 10, 15, even 20 years. I may be stressed out, have to go on anxiety medication, and I'm going to have to scale back my social life to the point that I may not even be able to find someone to date because I'm so stressed out and they don't want to deal with my student loan either. Very different. But really, that to some extent is what should be on the applications before students sign. But that's all hidden. And instead, we just simply say, hey, take the loan. You know what? You're going to be great. You're going to be fine. This is what you need. Something to think about, right? How I'm tackling my debt. Right now, I am on an income-based repayment plan where my payments are 10% of my discretionary income. Assuming this program is not changed by the government, if I make monthly payments for 20 years, then the remainder of my debt will be forgiven. This means my payments are smaller than they would be otherwise. But sometimes it just feels like I'm kicking the can down the road, and I know I will still have to deal with the bulk of my debt potentially. I will have to deal with the bulk of my debt eventually. Yeah. Again, 10% of discretionary income, and I've been following the news, and that may even lower to 5% in time. I've only seen a couple stories about lowering it from 10% discretionary income based to 5% income based. But again, we got the problem. Depending upon what type of field he chooses to go in, if he's not going into public service, he's got to make sure that the payment he makes will dip into the principal, or he's just going to wind up with a higher balance. And that means when the student loan is forgiven, he's just going to simply wind up having a higher tax bill. 20 years. So he's 28. That puts him at 48. And that is assuming he never goes on forbearance, never misses a payment, never goes into default. Puts him at almost 50. Is this fair to do this to young people? Is this really fair? And is it fair that we are encouraging young people to go to colleges, but we're not giving them the education on how to do it? It's kind of funny. A kid can get a $100,000 student loan and never have to take a day's class on student loan training. I think that's absolutely shameful, if not disgraceful. We will have kids sign on student loan lines quarter after quarter, sign. But do we demand that they take so much as a weekend course? I remember when I was married and I first started looking at, buying a house. I believe I believe it was part of it because I attended it. I had to attend an actual 2-day seminar through my bank on how to buy a piece of property. Okay? But we'll let an 18, 19, 20, 24-year-old kid sign off on a $100,000 student loan, and we just give them all the promises in the world and say, hey, just sign right here. There's something wrong with that. We make kids take a driver's test to get behind the wheel of a car, okay, to make sure they understand the rules of the road, but we don't require them to take any sort of student loan knowledge, basic knowledge 101. How student loans work. We don't require them to take any sort of test. And again, it's another video, but I think it has something to do with big business industries, and they need to understand that education is a business. But again, that's another whole video. And he's right. He's eventually going to have to tackle that debt. I have also learned that it is important to be honest and transparent about my struggle with student loan debt. When I kept it to myself, it felt like such an invisible burden. Now I want the people around me, especially those who do not have student loans, to understand the toll they take on borrowers. Hopefully, this sort of visibility will help us figure out a better solution to helping people afford a higher education without having to spend the rest of their life in intense debt. I can tell you that since I started this channel, I spoke with one woman, and she had a rather large student loan debt. And she was just bold enough. We were just kind of, sitting around chatting. And she just happened to mention it. Well, through mentioning that, she found out about the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program. And she has since applied for it along with several other people. But she would have never found out about that had she kept her student loan debt to herself and had not discussed it with me. Here is the thing. This story is heartbreaking because this is a young man who's only in his he's entering his late 20s. He's looking at this debt for 20 years if he doesn't go into public service. If he does not go into public service and hold a job for 10 years and make student loan payments, he's looking at being a 50-year-old man almost before he gets out of it. I think as far as it comes to lending to young people, I think the people that lend to them need to be held more accountable. And the solution, I should say, is not student loan forgiveness. Yeah, I got student loan forgiveness, but that's not the solution. The solution, and I don't have it, I'm sure like everybody else, I've got my theories, my hypothesis and whatnot, but the solution is not keeping college tuition the same and giving out loan forgiveness. That's not the solution, even though I'm fully aware that I got loan forgiveness. We need to find a solution so that people don't get into this type of debt in the first place, especially in their 20s. I feel like I am definitely responsible for my debt. I got it in my early 30s, but I hadn't been in college in years, and I have to tell you, I messed it up royally. $110,000, I messed it up, and it was only by the grace of God that this program came along, the waiver came along to clear it. Although it would have been cleared about 2.5 years from now to meet the 10-year requirement. But loan forgiveness isn't the solution to problems like this young man has, and the anxiety and the mental health. What is a degree? Really, what is a degree if all it's doing is stressing you out in mental health? And why don't we discuss this with the students before we give them the loan so they have understanding of what they're going into? Well, I'll tell you why we don't discuss it with them, because that doesn't go for real good brochure advertising now, does it? Doesn't bode real well to say, hey, you know what? take out a $100,000 student loan, and while you're at it, here's an attachment on the mental health services you're going to need to pay it off, because the degree you're going into either isn't going to make much money, it's oversaturated, maybe even the school you went to was fraudulent, okay? Those don't sell. But unfortunately, I believe that we as adults that have dealt with our student loans, that have struggled through them, I believe that we have a duty at this point to start telling young people and anybody who wants to go and pile on this debt, but young people especially, because they haven't had the work experience yet, they haven't had time to build assets yet that could potentially wipe it out. My condo, if I absolutely had to wipe out my student loan, my condo would wipe out my student loan and still leave me money left over. This young man, he got a master's degree right after he got his bachelor's degree. I think that's fine if you went to a college where you didn't have to pay much, like maybe you went on a scholarship or your parents had the cash, preferably the cash to pay for it. But in this case, I believe he would have been better off getting his bachelor's degree, and he admits it too, and I totally agree with him. Getting your bachelor's degree, stopping, paying off that bill, getting your work experience, and then getting your master's. And it's not just the economics of it, but he may also find that the degree he got for the bachelor's degree, after a few years of working and paying it off, he may change the degree that he goes for his master's. In other words, the master's degree you think you want right after you've achieved your bachelor's degree may actually change after you've gone into the work field, gotten some professional experience, and then you go, whoa, wait a minute. That's not the master's degree I want. There's a different master's degree I want. So it's a nice buffer. And also, I've been in the work field long enough to know that sometimes, not always, but sometimes a master's degree without the work experience to back it up, depending upon the industry you are in, it may actually hurt you. Yeah, you've got a master's degree, and again, this isn't for every field, but certain industries, they want the work experience more than they want the master's degree. So a person, let's say with a bachelor's degree, comes out of college, immediately goes into their field, gets 2-3 years of experience under it, okay, and has no master's degree, can actually fare better. They can do better than someone who gets a bachelor's degree, go straight into their master's, they still have no work experience, and now they're done saying, I've got my master's degree. If you're going to go get a master's degree right after you've got your bachelor's degree, I strongly suggest that somewhere in there, you need to have some sort of professional foot in the industry you're in. I don't care if it's through some sort of, preferably paid internship, okay? I'm not a fan of unpaid internships, especially in this day and age, but I understand that they do exist and people can do unpaid internships, but there are things to watch out for. Again, another whole video in itself. But if you can get some sort of professional work experience while you are getting your master's degree, then that to me is that's a good bang for your buck. But it's when people aren't getting that real professional work experience and they just simply go on to get their master's degree. You may find that you actually change what your master's degree would be on. So anyways, this story really, I won't say it bothered me, but I just see all the errors, the mistakes that I believe could have been avoided had this young man been given better guidance. And he could have still gotten to the same end result, maybe not as fast as he wanted, but he could have still gotten it. And it, honestly, with my debt and stuff, I look back and I realize just how stupid I was in some of the moves that I made, and a lot of the moves that I made. And I realized that I too was just as naive. I was just older than he was, but I was just naive in taking out my student loans. I was signing on the dotted line. I really wanted my master's, one master's, then 2 masters. I was careless in really keeping track of how much was being, how much loan I was taking out. I was careless in that, And the other thing too is, I know in school they'll sometimes say things like, when you're taking out the loan, they'll say, oh, well, you know, your monthly payment is going to be about this much. Well, about this much is very different from, you've now graduated, here's your monthly payment, good luck with it for the next 10, 20 years, and don't miss a payment. All right. So I want to thank this young man for coming out with his story and sharing it, because the stress and the anxiety, the only reason I don't believe I suffered, and I really didn't suffer too much mental health anguish on my end, is because I'm a public service worker. And that's the only reason. And I knew that in time it would be forgiven. But had I not been in public service, my loan would have just gone into retirement with me. But I think people forget that these young people were told to take out these debts. They were told this is the key to your future, and they took it out. And now they're suffering greatly, not just financially, but they're suffering mental health wise. And this is something we need to pay attention to. And it is something that we did to them. We have failed this person. And we can say, well, this is all his fault, blah, blah. No. He was 18, 19 when he took out these loans. Technically, he did everything on the book. He did everything right. Everything he was told to do. We failed him. And I think what saddens me a little bit is I didn't know about student loans. There weren't channels like this really even, 17 years ago when I took out my student loans. And I would have been in no position to help him either. But now I am. And that's what I'm using this channel for. And I hope it helps you. I'm Carrie. This is Student Loan Chit-Chat. I hope you'll consider subscribing. Have a great night.